There are moments when faith feels like ash, when every prayer hits the ceiling and falls back cold. For Ethan and Lily, life was meant to be simple: love, home, a child on the way. But one night in Clearwater, the river rose, the storm came, and faith drowned in the flood. What do you hold on to when God is silent? This is not a story of miracles. It's a story of being found again, of two hearts that walked through fire and found light on the other side. This is faith after fire. The wildfire came without warning. It began as a whisper in the pines, a dry wind, a faint crackle. Then the horizon lit up in violent orange. Within minutes, the fire had become a beast, devouring everything in its path. By the time Ethan Harper smelled the smoke, the sky was already bleeding red. "Lily!" he shouted, running through the yard. The wind pushed smoke into his eyes. The air was sharp with burning resin. Inside the house, Lily was tossing things into a box: photo albums, birth certificates, an ultrasound. "Leave it!" he yelled. "We have to go!" But she pressed the photo to her chest, the gray blur of their unborn child, 12 weeks along. "Just a second," she gasped. Outside, ash fell like black snow. They fled in their old truck as the flames chased down the hillside. The roar behind them grew louder, like the earth itself was screaming. Lily coughed violently, clutching her stomach. "Ethan, the baby!" He glanced over, panic flooding his chest. Her face had gone pale, lips trembling. "Hold on, just hold on!" The heat warped the air around them. A burning tree collapsed across the road ahead, forcing Ethan to swerve into the dirt. The truck slammed to a stop as a wave of embers rained over the windshield. For a moment, everything disappeared in white and fire. When Ethan opened his eyes, he was outside the truck, coughing. Lily was lying on the ground, dazed but alive. He pulled her into his arms. "We're okay, we're okay," he whispered, though he didn't believe it. The fire crews arrived an hour later. They were evacuated to a church shelter in the nearby town of Redding. That night, under the harsh fluorescent lights of the relief center, a paramedic checked Lily, then quietly shook his head. Ethan felt the world tilt. He heard nothing, not the sirens, not the prayers, not the weeping, only the hollow sound of his own heartbeat. Their baby was gone. Days blurred together. The insurance company called, volunteers came and went, and Lily's eyes seemed to dim a little more each morning. Ethan worked silently, fixing tents, handing out blankets, pretending to be useful. Inside, he was burning just as fiercely as the forest had. With Grandpa Spud's Oxley, the reading is slow, warm, inspiring, deep, and full of healing faith tone. Pastor Nolan, the old minister who ran the shelter, often stopped by. He never preached, he just sat near them, his presence like a calm shadow. "One thing I've learned," he said one evening, "is that faith isn't about avoiding the fire. It's about finding who walks with you inside it." Ethan didn't reply. He stared at his hands, blistered, cracked, and thought, if God walks in fire, he must have walked right past us. A week later, Ethan returned alone to what used to be their home. The valley was silent, stripped bare, charred trees like skeletal crosses under a gray sky. He walked through the ruins, boots crunching over glass and ash. Near the place where their bedroom had been, something caught his eye. A small metal cross, blackened but perfectly intact. He picked it up. The metal was cold, impossibly cold, as though untouched by the flames. Pastor Nolan, the old minister who ran the shelter, often stopped by. He never preached. He just sat near them, his presence like a calm shadow. "One thing I've learned," he said one evening, "is that faith isn't about avoiding the fire. It's about finding who walks with you inside it." Ethan didn't reply. He stared at his hands, blistered, cracked, and thought, if God walks in fire, he must have walked right past us. A tremor passed through him, not warmth, not comfort, something deeper, rawer. He looked up at the sky, the air still faintly smelling of death and smoke. If you were real, you could have stopped it. A gust of wind stirred the ashes, carrying a sound, faint like a distant bell. He froze. The sound faded, leaving silence behind. When he returned to the shelter, Lily was asleep. Her hand rested gently on her abdomen, the place where life used to be. Ethan stood watching her for a long time. Then he sat down beside her, the cross still cold in his palm. Outside, the valley was quiet. Inside, somewhere deep in his chest, something small, fragile, refused to die. That night, he dreamed of fire turning into light, and a figure standing at the center of it, whispering words he could not yet understand. 3 months passed. The ashes had turned to grass, and the valley was greening again. But Ethan Harper felt nothing bloom inside him. He and Lily now lived in a small rental house on the outskirts of Eugene, Oregon. The walls smelled of new paint and absence. Each night they shared the same bed, but different dreams. Hers were quiet, heavy with tears. His were full of fire. The neighbors said they were blessed to survive, but survival didn't feel like a blessing. It felt like punishment. Lily stopped going to church first. She said she couldn't stand the hymns. "They sound like lies now," she whispered. Ethan didn't argue. He stopped going too. On Sundays, they stayed in bed until noon. Sometimes he'd catch her staring at the ceiling, her hand unconsciously resting where her child once grew. He wanted to say something, anything, but the words turned to smoke in his throat. One afternoon, Pastor Nolan called. "There's a grief support group at St. Helena's Chapel," he said gently. "It's not about sermons, just people trying to find meaning again. Ethan almost hung up, but Lily said softly, "Maybe we should go." The chapel stood at the edge of the Willamette River, small and white, with vines curling up its stone walls. Inside, the air smelled of wax and cedar. There were 8 people sitting in a circle, all marked by loss. A woman who'd lost her husband to cancer, a veteran, a mother without a child. And then there was Grace Vega. She was in her 30s, with olive skin, sharp eyes, and a calm that seemed to silence the noise in the room. She wasn't clergy, but something about her presence felt sacred. When she spoke, it was slow, deliberate. "Pain," she said, "isn't the absence of God. Sometimes it's the only place He dares to meet us." Ethan's jaw tightened. He wanted to walk out, but Lily squeezed his hand, the first time she'd touched him in weeks. After the session, Grace approached them. "I'm glad you came," she said. "The hardest part is showing up." Her voice carried a trace of Spanish melody, soft, grounded. Ethan forced a nod. "We're not here for religion," he muttered. Grace smiled gently. "Neither am I. I'm here for truth. Sometimes they meet halfway." She handed him a card. "Dr. Grace Vega, Trauma Counseling, Faith Integration Specialist." He slipped it into his pocket, meaning to throw it away later. But he didn't. Days passed. Lily started seeing Grace weekly. She returned from their sessions quieter, but lighter somehow, like someone had opened a window inside her. Ethan couldn't understand it. One evening, when he came home from his shift at the mill, he found Lily sitting on the porch, holding a candle. "Grace asked me to light this," she said, "for the baby." Her voice didn't break this time. It was steady, almost peaceful. Ethan watched the flame flicker in the dusk. "It doesn't bring him back," he said. "No," she whispered, "but it brings me back." That night, Ethan dreamed again of fire, only this time it didn't burn. He saw a river running through blackened soil, light rippling across it. In the distance stood a figure, tall, cloaked in radiance, watching him. When he called out, the figure vanished, leaving behind a single whisper in his mind. "The fire isn't over. It's moving inside you." He woke drenched in sweat, his heart pounding. Lily was still asleep, her face calm in the candlelight. The small flame burned beside their bed, unwavering. Ethan stared at it for a long time, uncertain whether he wanted it to last or to go out. Winter came early that year. Fog crawled down from the Cascades, swallowing the trees in pale breath. Ethan drove the old Chevy pickup truck through the winding mountain road, hauling lumber for the mill. The radio hummed a distant hymn, one he used to sing in church, now just static in his ears. He hadn't dreamt of the fire in weeks, but every time he saw smoke in the sky, his chest tightened. It was like the memory had fused into his lungs. He turned a corner and saw a wreck. A silver sedan lay crumpled against a pine tree, steam pouring from its hood. Instinct took over. Ethan braked hard, jumped out, boots crunching on frost. "Hello? Anyone there?" he shouted. A woman was trapped inside, her face pale, blood on her temple. The driver's door was jammed, so Ethan smashed the window with his jacket. The cold bit his hands, but he didn't care. He dragged her out just before the front of the car burst into flames.
The story is read by Messianic TV channel. Please like and subscribe. Thanks.
The explosion threw both of them to the ground. For a moment, there was only silence and the hiss of burning fuel. She coughed, eyes fluttering open. God, I thought I was going to die," she whispered. Ethan looked at her, maybe mid-20s, dark hair, trembling hands clutching a silver cross around her neck. "Don't move," he said. "Help's coming." But when he checked his phone, there was no signal, only the endless gray of the mountains and the sound of wind. He ripped off his jacket and covered her. The air was freezing, breath visible in clouds. Then she said something that froze him more than the cold. "You were glowing," she whispered, "when you pulled me out. I saw light all around you." Ethan blinked. "What?" "Light," she insisted, "like fire, but it didn't burn." He almost laughed, but her gaze was too steady, too certain. He didn't answer. Hours later, the rescue team found them. The woman was safe, barely injured. They called Ethan a hero. He hated the word. That night, sitting alone in his truck, he stared at his hands. The same hands that couldn't save his child, the same hands that had once pulled a lifeless body from fire. Now someone said they had shone with light. He clenched his fists. "Don't do this to me," he muttered to the dark. "Don't make me believe again." Days turned into weeks. The woman, whose name was Mara Lewis, sent him a letter. "You don't know what you did for me. I was running from God when the crash happened. But when you pulled me out, I felt something holy. If you ever wonder whether He's still with you, He is." Ethan read it once, then tore it in half. But later that night, he found himself piecing it back together, smoothing the paper with trembling fingers. Lily noticed. "She wrote to thank you," she said softly. "Maybe it's a sign." "A sign?" he snapped. "A sign of what? That God saves strangers but kills children?" She flinched, eyes filling. "I don't know," she whispered. "But maybe He's trying to save you now." He looked away. The candle on their table flickered, the same one she'd lit for the baby. For a second, the flame bent toward him, like it heard, then steadied. That night, Ethan dreamed again. He stood on the same mountain road, but this time the sky above him was burning gold. A voice echoed, deep, not from outside, but from within. "You are chosen because you are broken and still standing." He woke, gasping, the echo still vibrating in his ribs. The dawn light was spilling through the curtains, warm, almost alive. For the first time since the fire, Ethan whispered a prayer, not to ask, but simply to be heard. The storm hit Oregon like a living thing. For 3 days, the valley drowned under black clouds. The Willamette River burst its banks, flooding fields, homes, and hearts already soaked in sorrow. Ethan watched the news in silence until Lily turned to him. "Grace is organizing a volunteer team," she said. "They need drivers, trucks like yours." He hesitated. "I'm no hero." "Maybe not," she replied, "but you've got hands that save." Something in her voice, calm, resolute, broke his resistance. The next morning, he found himself at the community shelter in Albany, where dozens of evacuees gathered. Grace Vega stood at the center, clipboard in hand, soaked but steady. When she saw him, she smiled. "Didn't think I'd see you here," she said. "Neither did I." "Sometimes obedience comes before belief," she said. "You'll see." Her words lingered as they loaded supplies into the truck: water, blankets, medical kits. The rain was relentless, cold as memory. They drove toward the flooded zone, a stretch of rural road half swallowed by the river. National Guard units were already there, rescuing families from rooftops. Suddenly, over the roar of wind came a scream. A van had overturned near the bridge, caught in the rising water. 2 people were trapped inside. Ethan slammed the brakes and jumped into the torrent. "Ethan, wait!" Grace shouted, but he was already waist deep. The current was brutal. It clawed at him, pulling with invisible hands. He reached the van, gripped the door handle, stuck. He yanked harder, breath ragged, heart hammering. Then something changed. The water around him stilled. Not completely, but just enough. He felt warmth spread through his chest, like a pulse that didn't belong to him. The handle moved. The door gave way. He pulled the first man out, coughing and panicked, then went for the second, a boy, maybe 12. The kid's head was under. Ethan dragged him out, laid him on the hood of a truck, started compressions. "Come on," he whispered. "Breathe." Nothing. Grace knelt beside him, eyes shining through the rain. "Don't stop." He pressed again, harder. His palms burned. No, glowed. For a heartbeat, the storm went silent. Every raindrop seemed frozen mid-air. The boy gasped once, twice, and coughed up water. Then the world rushed back. People shouted. The National Guard ran over. Grace stared at Ethan like she'd just witnessed something holy. He stumbled back, trembling. I didn't do anything," he stammered. Grace's voice was soft but steady. "Then tell me, whose hands were those?" Later, after the chaos had calmed, Ethan sat alone on the steps of the shelter. His clothes were torn, his body shivering, but inside him burned a strange warmth. Not fever, not fear, something else. Grace sat beside him. "What happened out there wasn't an accident," she said. "You felt it, didn't you?" Ethan nodded weakly. "For a moment, everything stopped, even the rain." "Sometimes," Grace said, "God bends time for a heartbeat, just enough to remind us He still breathes in it." He turned to her. "Why me?" "Maybe because you stopped running," she said. "Or maybe because someone prayed for you." He looked down, remembering Lily, her nightly candle. "I don't think I know how to believe anymore," he whispered. Grace smiled. "That's fine. Belief isn't a door you open. It's the light that leaks in through the cracks." That night, when Ethan returned home, Lily was waiting. She saw the exhaustion on his face and something else, something new. "You saw something," she said. He didn't answer. Instead, he took her hand, the one that used to tremble. "The boy lived," he said simply. "I don't know how." She pressed her forehead to his chest, tears silent. "Maybe," she said, "you finally let him in." Outside, the rain had stopped. The valley shimmered under a pale dawn, and for the first time since the fire, Ethan didn't feel hollow. He felt held. For a week, Clearwater Valley couldn't stop talking about it. The story spread faster than the storm had. A man who stopped the flood with his hands, a boy who came back from the dead. By Sunday, half the town was whispering in the pews. At the small church near the hillside, Pastor Reuben stood at the pulpit, face tense. "I've heard rumors," he said, his voice measured, "about a so-called miracle." His eyes found Ethan sitting in the back beside Lily. "Brothers and sisters," the pastor continued, "we must remember, not every light comes from heaven." A ripple of murmurs ran through the crowd. Ethan lowered his head. Lily's hand found his, trembling again, not from fear this time, but from anger. After service, people gathered outside. Some approached Ethan to thank him. Others stepped back as if he carried contagion. Grace was waiting near her truck. "You shouldn't have come," she said quietly. Ethan frowned. "What, to church?" "To the wolves," she said. He gave a bitter laugh. "I thought this place was supposed to be a sanctuary." "It was," she said, "until it saw something it couldn't explain." That afternoon, the pastor called Grace to his office. "Miss Vega," he said, "I understand you witnessed the event." "Yes, sir." "Would you say it was divine?" Grace hesitated. The clock ticked. "I'd say it was real." "That's not what I asked," Reuben said. His tone sharpened. "If you call this a miracle, you risk leading souls astray." Grace's jaw tensed. "And if it was a miracle, what then?" Reuben leaned forward. "Then it wasn't meant to glorify him," he said, nodding toward the church window, toward Ethan outside, loading food crates for flood victims. "And certainly not you." Grace's voice softened. "Pastor, with respect, maybe this wasn't about glory. Maybe it was about mercy." That evening, Ethan drove home in silence. The rain had stopped, but the world still looked wet, like it hadn't yet forgiven the sky. When they got home, Lily handed him a letter. "It came today," she said. It was from the insurance company. Another denial. Their house, still damaged from the fire months ago, wouldn't be covered. Ethan let the letter fall onto the table, his jaw clenched. "So that's it," he said. "We lose the house too." Lily closed her eyes. "Ethan?" "No, I'm done," he said, voice cracking. "Maybe the pastor's right. Maybe whatever happened out there wasn't God. Maybe it was just madness." Silence. Then Lily walked to him, slow, steady. She took his face in her hands. "Madness doesn't bring a boy back to life," she said. "And it doesn't bring peace to a man who's been running for years." He looked at her, really looked. Her eyes weren't desperate anymore. They were alive. 2 days later, the news crew arrived. Local Channel 8 wanted to interview the man who saved the boy. Grace refused, but Ethan agreed, partly to set the record straight, partly because he didn't know what else to do. On camera, under the flat light of morning, the reporter asked, "Ethan Brooks, people say you performed a miracle. Did you?" Ethan paused. The microphone waited. He could feel the weight of the valley pressing on him. Hope, doubt, curiosity. Finally, he said, "I don't think I performed anything. I think something performed through me." "Something?" the reporter asked. Ethan nodded. "Someone." Grace, watching from a distance, felt tears prick her eyes. That night, as Ethan and Lily sat on their porch, candles flickered inside the house, one for every person still displaced by the flood. "You know," Lily said softly, "when I saw you that night after the storm, I thought I was looking at a stranger. But now I think maybe I was seeing the man you were always meant to be." Ethan smiled faintly. "I'm not sure what that means." "Maybe it means the fire didn't destroy us, it refined us." The moonlight caught her hair, and for the first time he saw in her the same quiet strength that had carried them through everything, the grace he'd never recognized until now. He reached for her hand. "Maybe you were the miracle all along," he whispered. In the distance, the church bells rang, not for warning, not for mourning, for Sunday, a new one. It had been 6 months since the flood. Clearwater was healing, roads repaired, homes rebuilt, the smell of pine returning after months of rot and mud. Ethan and Lily's house stood again, smaller than before, but filled with light. The insurance never came through, but the community had. Volunteers, donations, neighbors rebuilding together. Some evenings, Ethan would sit on the porch, listening to the crickets and the faint bell of the church in the distance. It no longer sounded like judgment. It sounded like home. Grace still visited every Sunday. She'd bring bread or stories of families resettled. Sometimes they prayed together, sometimes they didn't. Silence was prayer enough. That night, as autumn winds brushed through the valley, Grace parked her truck and looked toward the church. "Tomorrow's the anniversary," she said softly. Ethan nodded. "Of the fire." The church had burned 1 year ago, the same night they lost their child, the same night he'd lost his faith. "With Grandpa's hosting a remembrance," Grace said. "He asked if you'd come." Ethan hesitated. "You think I should?" Grace smiled. "I think you already said yes in your heart." The next evening, the little church on the hill glowed again. Not in flames this time, but in candlelight. People gathered, farmers, students, mothers holding children. The pews were full, yet the air was gentle, humble. Pastor Reuben stood at the front. He looked older somehow, his voice quieter. 1 year ago, this church burned, but what survived was not the walls nor the roof. It was us." He paused, eyes landing on Ethan and Lily. "Sometimes God lets the fire come not to punish, but to reveal what cannot burn." Ethan squeezed Lily's hand. As the service ended, Lily stepped outside for air. The valley shimmered under the last breath of sunset. She turned and froze. Behind the church, in the garden, stood a boy, maybe 8 years old, lighting a candle. His face turned up toward her. It was him, the boy from the flood. He waved shyly. "My mom says thank you," he said. "She couldn't come tonight." Lily felt tears spill before she could speak. "You've grown," she whispered. The boy smiled. "So did you." Then he looked toward the sky. "Mom says God doesn't waste pain. He plants it." She swallowed hard. "And what does it grow into?" He shrugged. "Maybe us." Ethan came around the corner just as the boy ran off into the dusk. "Who was that?" he asked. Lily wiped her eyes. "Just a reminder." They stood there a moment. No thunder, no visions, just wind through the pines and the smell of candle wax. And then smoke. A faint hiss from inside the church. Someone had knocked over a candle. Panic rose, shouts breaking out. Ethan ran in. The flame was crawling up the old curtain near the altar. "Water!" someone yelled. But before anyone could react, Ethan grabbed the burning cloth and tore it down with his bare hands. He pressed it to the floor, smothering it. When he stood, his palms were blackened, but the fire was out. Pastor Reuben rushed over. "Are you—" "I'm fine," Ethan said, breathing hard. "It's out." The pastor looked at him for a long moment, then at his hands. "You've done it again," he whispered. Ethan shook his head. "No, this time I just didn't let it spread." Later, after everyone had left, the church was quiet again. Grace stayed behind to clean the wax drippings. "You okay?" she asked. Ethan smiled faintly. "You know, I used to think faith was about being rescued from the fire, but maybe it's about learning to walk through it and still sing." Grace looked at him, eyes gentle. "That's not the same man I met last year." "No," he said softly, glancing toward Lily outside, speaking with Reuben under the stars. "He didn't survive the fire, but she did, and maybe that's enough." As they left, Ethan closed the old wooden door of the church. From inside, candlelight flickered against the stained glass, a small flame, steady and alive. Lily slipped her arm through his. "Do you think he's still here?" she asked. Ethan looked back at the church, then at the valley, at the homes, the laughter, the healed land. "He never left," he said. "We just had to stop running." And as they walked down the hill, the night didn't feel dark at all. It felt like dawn. In the end, faith wasn't about being rescued from the fire. It was about learning to stand within it and still believe. Clearwater healed, but not because time passed, because love stayed. And somewhere between the ashes and the dawn, Ethan and Lily found the one thing they thought they'd lost forever. Not their child, not their home, their faith. And maybe that's the real miracle.